Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast, the podcast for special educational needs and disability. And if this is your first one, then welcome. Come and join the podcast. Each week we talk about a different topic within the world of SEN to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools, and to empower parents. And in this episode, we discuss better oracy through building speech and language skills in schools. And this was discussed with Yin Collighan and Louise Emerson, who are both specialist speech and language therapists from Speech and Language Link. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. And did you know we have AI in our assessment software? Teachers can use our AI to help write their reports or summarise progress or next steps. Teachers can choose those key achievements or next steps for each pupil, so it's still very personalised. The AI takes the hard work away, turning what you want to focus on and create those lovely paragraphs of text with the correct he's and she's and all those things going on when you're copying and pasting. All that's taken care of. The system can also translate that text into 40 different languages, helping to engage parents where English is not that first language. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and all of its AI features. Now, let's get on with the podcast. My guests on this week's episode are Yin Collighan and Louise Emerson from Speech and Language Link. Yin and Louise are specialist speech and language therapists supporting product development, and they both advise and train staff in schools. Yin has worked with Speech and Language Link since 2022, and before this she worked with the NHS and council services for 10 years. Lou has been with Speech and Language Link for just under a year, but has also worked in the NHS for 10 years. Welcome to the show, Yin and Louise.
Hello. Hello.
So, today we're talking about oracy and how schools can improve it by focusing on the foundations of speech and language. So, let us start with a definition of oracy.
Oracy is basically, well, it's quite complicated to explain. There's not been a really very clear definition in the Oracy Commission's document. We Need to Talk, Education Commission's document. They define it as articulating ideas, developing understanding and engaging with others through speaking, listening and communication. And they kind of term communication in their context, meaning things like AAC and sign and, talking as well. So basically, in kind of more simple terms, it's having the skills to communicate and learn effectively by talking and listening, and involves things like persuading or engaging and collaborating. So yeah, it's quite a wide definition there, but that's what they've come up with.
I'm quite sad that the Oracy Commission do not understand or have a clear definition of what oracy is. Do you think that's your main role?
It's quite a tricky one because I think it's got its roots in sort of the debate culture in public schools, doesn't it? And obviously it's not a very inclusive way of thinking, that, is it? We really like that they've included the word communication. So, when I worked in the NHS, I worked with a lot of non-speaking and non-verbal children with the best will in the world. I'm sorry, speech and language therapy have worked on their verbal communication, or perhaps then it's never going to be appropriate for them. So, yeah, we're glad they've included communication in their latest thought around it.
The thing is, I think when you think of oracy, there is speech and language, and we talk about the ability to communicate and sound and listen and all those sorts of things. But I suppose oracy is then using that for a purpose more. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would say it is using it for a purpose more. I mean, there's 3 different aspects of it. There's kind of learning to talk, listen, and communicate. So it's about developing those skills, the speaking, listening, communication skills. And it's also thought to be learning through talking, listening, communicating as well. So it's different ways of learning. So it's kind of different from literacy in a way, in the way that things can be taught. There's a kind of very rich way of learning there, where children are maybe bouncing ideas off each other. They're able to share their opinions in a much more kind of fluid and dynamic way. There's a way to kind of really get the perspectives of other people, or like if there's characters, they're talking about the perspective of characters from a book, that sort of thing, really. So it's a different way of learning, a really kind of good, rich way of learning. And then there's the third thing as well about like kind of learning about talking, listening, communicating. So how communicating comes about, what's good that they can do to communicate a point and that sort of thing. So they're kind of looking at themselves and going, this is, these are the things I'm strong at and these are things I can work on.
Because the fact that things are called spoken language and it's always spoken or speech and language, it's like, yeah, that's up there, but there's lots of things beneath that. And
Yes.
as a company, we often use the term spontaneous communication. It's that hearing something and responding rather than recorded being written and reading. We like the term spontaneous communication because we're not saying how it is communicated.
Well, I think this as well as, where we used to think about, in therapy, we would say to people about the joy of communication. I don't want you to learn lines to say to another person when they say these specific lines. It's, well, what are we doing here? We're sharing a moment. We're, both bonding over something we think is disgusting, or we're really excited about, or, and it's not forgetting all of that human stuff around communication. It's not a tick box of, if you look at a person and then you sit up straight and use your good ears. It is actually being in the moment as well. And sometimes if you're using less words, I know when I get passionate about things, I quite often completely either lose my train of thought and go, what are we talking about? Or I go off in a completely different direction. And if I had somebody saying to me all the time, oh, stop, I just stop talking. I'd just go, okay, well, I'm obviously not right for this I'm not right for this conversation. So, you shrink a bit, you get smaller, you get quieter, and you stop. And really, I think at the root, at the bottom of this, we've said underpinning everything of these speech, language, and communication skills, it's to get people involved and to be part of groups, part of communities, isn't it? So
I think, Louise, you've just been to Legoland with your child and you've had lots of fun. And that's a
yes.
great example for me of where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How was that ride? Was it too scary? Was it fast? Was it all those sorts of things where you're learning about that personality and what they like? That comes from using that information you have about how to communicate, and it's how I communicate me.
Yes. And I think we've talked about what could be really positive in a sort of a spoken driven curriculum is learning about communication generally. So I know there's a lot around neurodivergent folk at the moment and how they communicate, and how maybe things that were taught in the past, like we're going to work on eye contact, actually that's now seen as quite inappropriate for a lot of people. There's concerns around, if you teach masking behaviours, then you get the mental health issues further down the line. But actually teaching a whole class, for some people, eye contact is tricky. For other people, in certain situations, the expectation is that you will look at them. Maybe some people need to learn that just because I'm not looking at you, I am still paying attention. And other people may say, you know what, I could cope in a job interview for an hour. I can learn to look at somebody. I might just have to explain, look, this is really tricky for me, and it's learning about other people. Like you said, it's learning about how other people communicate as well. It's not just trying to get everybody to do the same thing.
And I think that's something that, in terms of the kind of guidance at the moment, the information about Oracy, it's something that's kind of being considered somewhat, but maybe there needs to be more thought and more discussion around how certain children's speech language communication needs really do struggle with certain aspects of Oracy. Children who are neurodiverse might struggle with the things that are put down in the Oracy framework. There's a kind of list, the kind of 4 different aspects, and there's areas such as eye contact, there's areas such as body language, there's things like voice and self-regulation and confidence and things like that, which lots of children who have speech and language difficulties, including the children who are autistic, those with ADHD, and they will have difficulties with those areas. And it is I think it's really quite tricky to measure Oracy, and I think that's one of the big conundrums. I mean, I know it's been talked about in conferences and things like that, where, how do we assess this? How can we make sure that children are doing well in this? But there's no kind of one size fits all. Children communicate in different ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a wrong way if they're not making eye contact, and it's not necessarily it's a wrong way if they're using lots of visuals and things like that, or if there's a lot of kind of humor in what they're kind of communicating. It's just their own personal way to do it, and it may well be that they need to use these different ways to put their point across in the best, most effective way that they can. But it's important that we do discuss how these can be part of strengths, what we would consider as strengths in their communication. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it's definitely something that, it'd be great as speech language therapists that we can put our point across, and for the Oracy Commission to pay attention to.
Yes, I think that's definitely something that was my gut reaction when I first heard it was, well, this is speech and language therapy. A lot of this is our job. We work on improving children's vocabulary, or giving them the skills, or supporting staff to teach vocabulary in different ways. Things like the grammar that they use. Some children might struggle to understand jokes. Children with developmental language disorder, if they're not learning language at the same rate as their peers, they, just as much as children with a diagnosis of autism, hit their teens when there's a lot of banter and just can't keep up with it. If you're saying to them, well, inject humour into your talking, or use anecdotes, and they're sort of going, right, I just want to get the facts across. Like, let's just work on that first of all. And as I said, I think I did say earlier, there might be, I worry that there might be things being promoted that as a profession we would go, oh, we've moved past that, actually. That doesn't work. We've done that. We're still here. I know there's not enough of us. I absolutely know that. There's a shortage across private and NHS provisions, but we are still here, and we're incredibly passionate about supporting children, young people and adults. Some people like to work with adults, others of us don't.
I guess it's about kind of making sure that all our children have a voice, no matter how it comes across. If they're using AAC, for that to be heard. If they need to use different methods, and that's absolutely fine as well. And I think it'll be very important for, any talking curriculum, anything in the future to recognise that, and hopefully there'll be a way forward with that.
We need a new word for voice, don't we?
Yeah,
because
we always need a new word for Oracy, to be fair.
Yes,
because that's the thing. But even because if you say non-verbal, non-verbal to me means not words.
Yes, so
but
there's
most
also,
of the time it'll be not vocal would be the correct term.
Yeah, but there's a bit of a debate about this, because there are certain, there's different groups prefer different terms. So there's non-speaking, which I've heard more autistic adults say they prefer that term. They can physically produce voice, but in some situations or at certain times they can't use their spoken word. So actually they do need whether it's something like a simple piece of paper with some symbols on, or whether they have got a sort of dynamic screen speaking device as a backup. But then there are populations of people who have no or very little physical voice ever to be produced. Say for a condition like cerebral palsy, if you've your voice your vocal folds just don't work, or don't work in the way you want them to, so actually you do have to rely on other methods. And then you've got the deaf community, who are a whole nother thing, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but BSL being a separate language, and even people not understanding that that's a separate language. Or do I I've seen a few things, should I use Makaton or BSL for my child who's struggling to talk? Well, are they a member of the deaf community who needs a whole other language to communicate because of how they are? Or are they somebody who needs keywords signed, or to use keywords? Yeah, it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I think with BSL and Macron, it's like, what's the destination, or what's the hopeful destination?
Yeah.
Of that. But I think all the stuff we're talking about, it's how that person communicates, you need to know them. You need to know a bit about them to be able to say how well they're communicating. But also you need to be opening and be able to listen in lots of different ways.
Absolutely.
Because if you're just listening to the words, that's one thing. If I'm open my eyes and I'm seeing how it's being delivered, I'm maybe seeing the nerve. You get a lot more information just by watching and listening, the tone of voice, there's so much more, but it's you've got to learn how to listen as well as them learning how to communicate.
That's it. Yes, it's so important to be observing them kind of holistically. And really I mean, the thing is that helps you know what areas that they might be struggling with, and then you can give them support with that. And also to like have, if you can, to have a conversation with them and say, how are you finding this? Or maybe a way of them feeding back, how are you finding this work? How do you find the talking? Do you feel comfortable with it? How can we help you? How can we support you to feel comfortable? And maybe even observations in different parts of their lives, like for example, if they're doing paired work, or if they're working with certain people, their peers, if they're in the playground, even those kind of things, or what they kind of choose, their preferences are also important to help children to, develop their language skills, to develop their oracy skills, to become much more confident talkers, or, however they communicate. It's, observing is such an important thing.
I would say in kind of typical classrooms around the country, children are talked at.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is, here is the information, watch this, do this, write stuff down, do work. And actually, in a lot of classrooms, there isn't that opportunity for children to talk, to discuss, to have those little group discussions, discuss with a partner, to present information orally or anything like that. And I think that's one of the things which will, as there's this drive towards oracy, that change needs to happen in classrooms.
Absolutely. I mean, from what I've seen in the classes where I've done observations in, there have been some brilliant examples of, carpet time discussions, that kind of snowball technique, and all these different things. And it's been wonderful to see. But I would agree that there's just not enough of it, and it's so rich and it's so useful when I've seen it being done. So yes, it's lovely that there's going to be much more emphasis, and that's one of the biggest benefits of all kind of the Oracy drive going ahead. That's one of the biggest benefits there, just to see people put that importance on talking. And then I think what we'll also see is that people realize how, teachers and teaching staff will realize how many children are actually finding this really difficult, a difficult area for many children. And there will be, that what do we do next? How can we support those children? And then the thoughts about, how can we support those kind of foundational skills to help them with their oracy. So in a way, it's really great, and hopefully, people will find the best way to approach all this work, and they'll understand actually there will be some, what do you call them? There'll be some hurdles to it, and then figure their way around it. I think one of the things is that there isn't that much time in class either. So I think I did a presentation with Abigail Hawkins for Sensible Senko, and she was saying, how does this get fit in to, in the current school day? And I mean, it's a really good point. How does it get fit in?
Well, I think this is part of wider conversations about the curriculum and how fit for purpose it is at the moment. I think it's a really good time to, let's just discuss everything. And if we say, as we say, speech and language are the building blocks of everything. Well, how do we just tweak to get a little bit more language in? And I know we've discussed in the office, we've got colleagues whose children are teachers talking about how little training they get on speech and language. And, part of this is going to be, you can't just dump all of this on teachers without additional support. We did degrees on speech and language therapy. We can't just say, right, come on, guys. Well, come on, it's just talking, isn't it? And to sort of increase the knowledge. And at the very beginning, we had a colleague who said, her daughter had half a day on speech and language therapy in her teacher training course, which when you're arguing, it underpins every single subject. You need to know about vocabulary and science. You need to follow instructions. Maths questions. Mr. Brown went with his 3 children to the cinema. They went at 2:15. if you arrive before 3 o'clock, it's this much money. There's so much language involved in all of that. It needs to be important right from the beginning and not putting the burden on teachers who already have so much to do. Just come on, get on with it. That's not fair on them either. As much as we want our children and young people to be talking more in schools, we've got to be realistic about the staff that are going to be delivering it.
If we look at the primary national curriculum, you have end-of-year outcomes for reading. You have end-of-year outcomes for writing. You have key stage descriptors for spoken language. If we look at the pre-key stage standards, we have reading pre-key stage standards. We have writing pre-key stage standards. No spoken language. So even in terms of accountability and all those sorts of things, the spoken language, Oracy, that whole side of it is completely missing. And I think it comes back to one of the things you said is, how do you define Oracy? But also, in a school, how do I assess and prove? Because there's this accountability. I have to be able to say and show what they've achieved. And if they just had half an hour of talking, how do I say they've achieved something? I think that comes into schools. How can we say, by spending half an hour talking every week and learning all of these skills, how can I say this is improving with the current criteria we have to use?
It's tricky because I feel like a lot of it is more quantitative. So whether it is saying to children, do you, at the beginning of the year, how confident do you feel contributing in class? How confident do you feel that your ideas will be listened to? Have I got some strategies? That sort of thing, to measure it that way, because otherwise you're going down a language assessment route, aren't you? Let's see how much vocabulary you know. Let's see, do you understand this instruction? I want you to tell me, something I used to do quite a lot in assessments, tell me how to make a sandwich. But that wasn't scored, and it's quite a tricky, I think it's quite a tricky thing to look at. So obviously our company does standardized screening assessments. We recommend that they screen the children's receptive language reception, year 3 or 4, and then year 7. And from this autumn in nursery with our new package. But yeah, to sort of screen their receptive skills. But it's quite difficult to screen their output, because you need to be able to sort of pick apart their grammar a little bit. You need to know, comment on things like the appropriacy of their language. Even, think about things like when you've worked with teenagers, if they're swearing in context, at least you could say, well, they use the F word with an ing on the end. So that's, some grammar there. Yeah, that sort of thing. I think it's going to be quite tricky. And I think it's going to be quite tricky unless there's some strict guidelines. However, are the guidelines then inclusive of different areas of the country, different socioeconomic areas, people's accents? We wouldn't ever fix an accent as a speech therapist. We want people to sound like the people around them. What is, and I think you've touched on it, what are we aiming for? Isn't it? So, sorry, I'm monologuing slightly there. I get quite passionate about things. So
yeah, I guess it is what are we aiming for at the end of the day, and maybe it is almost like I don't know, a point system or something, or a way of just going, well, they do this and they do this. They can communicate effectively, and they communicate via these means, and that's fine. Maybe it's just that way instead. What is the purpose, rather than what exact skills are they using?
Because we don't want another checklist, do we?
No.
Or maybe something like the child, by the end of each key stage, has almost got a communication passport of what they're good at, how they like to communicate, and what's tricky for them. Everybody then has learnt more about themselves, and it's more equipping them with useful skills rather than let's check this and do another round of assessments for primary age children. I know we're talking about this in secondary as well, but yeah.
I'm trying to work out kind of what would be in that checklist, and you can go really bad with it. But in some ways, you're kind of, part of it will be to explain what they did at the weekend. And it's how kind of, but then you might have a child who's very factual because they're neurodivergent, missing out all how they felt about it, or they just went through chronological order. And then another child who's really telling you how everything felt and everything. But another aspect is if Yin says something and I completely disagree, how well do I constructively say I disagree without hurting Yin's feelings? Because that's a whole skill. And there's a whole scale around all of that. And that's ability. You can't just write down a nice, simple question and then there is this is the answer you're expecting.
I talk about swearing quite a lot. So, I'm sorry, I don't swear that much myself. I've worked with teenagers. We've all had the 14-year-old who comes in and says, excuse me, they were using swear words in the playground. You told me it's not appropriate to swear. And as someone who's worked with AAC users, I remember in an Adults with Learning Disabilities placement, my placement educator saying, you need to build in swear words. It's appropriate for a 40-year-old to know, maybe you don't swear at somebody. You maybe don't swear talking to a doctor. Oh, you might if you're in a lot of pain and they're not listening. But you know what I mean? It's a nuanced skill.
If I say there is a skill around using swear words correctly.
Yes, exactly.
They're also in a different part of the brain, so they serve a purpose and all these sorts of things. There is a reason they're there.
Yes, I'm really sorry, but I'm not advocating swearing in an Oracy curriculum, but it's just a really good example.
But it's interesting. We were talking about safeguarding on a recent podcast, and we're talking about in the AAC kind of vocabulary, is there ability to report or kind of give information about something that's happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
Is that language there?
Yep.
So you can actually say something happened to me and it was inappropriate.
Yeah. As simple as I didn't like it. I don't understand. You are working with different levels of language, obviously, but to have that, your vocabulary is gatekept by whoever programs your AAC device. And if they don't have things in that you need to say, how can you say them?
And it's a really interesting that I never even thought about that. Literally, you are limiting what the how and what they can communicate. And I'm not saying give 12-year-olds swear words. No. But if all their peers are using them, you should give them access. But then you teach them they don't use them around parents and teachers, and use them with your friends. But and there's somebody I've seen on does reels on or YouTube or shorts and whatever. He's a wheelchair user and he's shopping with his mum in a supermarket and gets his AAC to say the most ridiculously things about, Mum, don't forget to get the crack. We need more of those hard drugs. And that is coming out of his thing, and his mum is just hiding. And the other shoppers are looking, but it's like, he should be allowed and be able to say that. You shouldn't be taking that away from him. That is his humour.
Yes.
But and that's the sort of thing. Oracy, I suppose, covers all of these things. It's not can you say all these different vowels and consonants and sounds and do all this, but actually, how successfully are you communicating how you feel or your needs? Yeah.
And is it safe? You might be feeling that you're absolutely in the right. Maybe it's, okay for you to shout at your mate who's going to shout back. Maybe you don't shout at an authority figure who has, in that moment, got the power to make your life quite unpleasant. And learning about the appropriacy. And for some children and young people, it is really tricky to quiet that voice that says, no, that adult is in the wrong. They're absolutely in the no. I just can't let this go because I'm so upset about it in this moment.
But I would say sometimes that again comes down to your Oracy skills. Is sometimes you're frustrated and you go to blah.
Yep.
Whereas actually, if you had more skills, if you had a better knowledge of using them, we could use them more effectively. You might be less shouting at that authority figure and just going and maybe explaining why. Because that authority figure might be wrong.
Yeah.
But they probably believe they're right on the information they have.
Yes.
And if you can provide more information and help them see that actually they may have misunderstood the situation, you might get a better outcome.
Absolutely.
Yes. And this is where learning about communicating at different times, even if it's some people need to learn, if I start myself rising, I just need to say, I'm getting angry. And like I say to my 4-year-old, look, I'm getting really angry. I can't talk to you right now because I'm just going to start shouting at you. So I need to leave, or you need to leave, or one of us needs to leave the room. And that in that moment is sort of keeping us both safe. And I can come back to him at a later time and appeal to his 4-year-old sensibilities and explain why he couldn't, have marshmallows just before he's brushing his teeth for bed. That sort of thing. So,
Yeah. But again, it's having that conversation rather than saying, no, why? Because I said so. Okay, that's useless information. And B, it hasn't given me an opportunity to respond. But also, thirdly, it's taught me that if I just say no and because, that's how I just tell someone else no.
Yeah.
Actually, no, why? Because you're about to brush your teeth and there's sticky marshmallows. And also, we don't eat, all those sorts of things. We don't eat just before dinner. There are rules, whether or not you agree with them, but it's having that conversation. If he sits down and goes, but actually, blah, 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 you might go, you know what, today you can.
Yeah.
But it's down to those skills. It's about, in reality, that is debating. You are debating with a 4-year-old.
Negotiation skills, persuasion skills, all of those things come in, don't they? I mean, if the Oracy curriculum, if all goes well and all these children are trained, have all these brilliant skills here, then we might be having kind of different. There'll be a bit of different parenting, really.
I was like, what you might end up
change
doing
a lot.
is having to do Oracy courses for parents.
That's
how
it.
to win an argument with your child because they're better than you.
They're better at it now.
Perhaps that's a whole kind of conspiracy theory. We always keep the children Oracy levels worse than the parents. The parents never lose.
Perhaps.
Oh, well, let's not start a new conspiracy.
So there's no speech and language training for teachers, so we don't do Oracy. Yeah, it's fitting. That thought process is fitting really quite clearly now. It's less of a conspiracy theory and quite obviously true. But again, we're talking about everything we kind of talk about is generally through the words, through vocal communication, through back and forth, quick communication. Mum, I want this. No. When we change the different communication methods, the skills are the same. I would say mostly. It's probably, if I'm using AAC, there's obviously no tone, there's no body language. You're just getting the pure words. So how, again, if somebody's not ever really experienced using AAC, how do you get those additional bits through AAC? Is that possible? So like the humour, the sarcasm, how does that kind of come through? Can you do that through AAC in the same way?
Depends on the user and depends on the method. Obviously, AAC is a very broad umbrella, and technically signing comes under that. And I was listening to something about BSL and about how a lot more of their language is more sort of slapstick. That the humour is more slapstick because it's visual. And if you ever watch two deaf people signing, like the facial expressions are so much more animated than people who use spoken words. And you do, I've worked with children who use the multi-screen speaking computers, generally iPads, a lot of them use iPads. But, some of them will look at you and laugh. There is still that body language and that facial language, or you can see, even a very, classed as a PMLD young person I worked with, and we worked out that they had an amazing sense of humour, and they could actually do a 4-step joke, and they would look at you and you could hear the laugh coming, and you could see in their face that I've got you now. So they still do that. And again, another young person, I'd suggested they have a volume button to simply shout. When they were cross, they could turn the volume up and shout, "Excuse me," and they were a little bit against using, because they wanted to be a spoken voice user. And once I showed them, but what if you could shout? They went, "Oh, yes, please." And I don't know, as technology comes on, whether there will be the ability to tweak the sort of spoken output of more. I can't remember the exact words. I've lost all my AAC words. Whether there'll be more sort of nuance in spoken words. I know they're looking at, much more for accents and stuff, so people feel more like them. But
I can see it happening though with the rise of AI and things like that.
I think as you start throwing those emojis in, so you'll say something as an emoji. Oh, well, that emoji means say it like this.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think when you're texting, there are those who use emojis and can do sarcasm and have lots of fun, and there are those who are not using them, and that's when you kind of get misunderstood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Always need an emoji.
No.
That's very helpful.
We had a discussion in the office, and so apparently amongst people our age, like a thumbs up is cool, I agree with that. But amongst younger people, it's really passive aggressive, and young people don't use emojis as much as
that's interesting.
I never knew millennials. That. Yeah, there's more. They more do voice notes, which to me is horrific. Why?
I've been told off for using a thumbs up before several times.
Yeah.
So are you in a mood?
I know my daughter said you just thumbs up. I was like, yeah. You told me some information. Do you want me just to write okay? They're like, yes. I went, but surely a thumbs up is the same as an okay. But again, this comes back to the Oracy of our expectations, their understanding, our understanding, generational differences. Mm-hmm. So how well that's communicated, again, is another layer of how old is the person I'm communicating with? Do they know who the A-team is? Yes, right, thumbs up.
Oh, dear. Yeah, so then you hit cultural things, and, I think some countries that's quite rude, isn't it? And this is where it goes back to expectations around eye contact and things. There are certain, I've worked with some children who it's really disrespectful to look at an adult when, you listen by looking down to show that you're being respectful. So it's, cultural again. So it is really tricky.
And I think, in terms of neurodiversity, neurodivergence, it's really important that we try to understand each other's perspectives when we're talking. So someone who might just be quite brief, quite factual and that sort of thing, that's not being rude. That's the way that they communicate. That's how they do it, and they're just trying to get their facts across. And that should be absolutely fine. There shouldn't be kind of consideration that actually this person doesn't want to talk, is just being rude. There's got to be that understanding. This is how each of us communicate, and to allow learners to communicate in their own way. I think Louise is really good at explaining the double empathy problem, but that really comes into it. And I'm just kind of like pointing at you, Louise,
where am I? Yeah. So this idea that a neurodivergent person and a neurodivergent person communicate really well. And a neurotypical person typically communicate quite well. It's when you cross the streams, the big one is somebody says, I've got a headache. And if somebody responds to them, oh yeah, my foot was really sore this morning. Whether that first person takes it as, well, we were talking about me, why are you talking about yourself now? Or the other person goes, oh, you're trying to join me in understanding that there was some physical pain this morning. Yeah, I get that. And it's not a one-upman thing. This is a way of joining together and having this joint conversation. So it is just learning different communication styles and how to repair things. I think one of the big Oracy things could be how to repair things when things go wrong, and having the skills to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand where you're going with that joke. Oh, we seem to be talking about something else what I thought we were talking about. Or this is really interesting. I don't know if I said, but I do have to leave in 1 minute. I'd love to hear more about this later and fit it, and learn about
being
fixing
quite
each other's.
That's it, being quite open and honest about what you're understanding, what you're not understanding, being quite curious about that rather than having that assumption that person's doing it in a negative way. They're doing it because they don't want to talk or whatever. It's and that's good. I think that fits well into the Oracy framework of the idea of how we communicate. How do people communicate? And it's a really useful thing to learn.
That's coming into the advocating for yourself. Yes. I need to leave. I don't understand. I need more information. I think you've misunderstood me. All of that is around that self-advocacy. How do you say, I need support? How do you say, I need to go and do... all those sorts of things, putting your needs, when someone's telling you this and you're going, okay, he's talking, and my train, I've got to be out of here in a minute, and you end up being late because you just didn't know what to do. All of that comes to about self-advocacy of actually, how do I communicate my needs, and how do I change the conversation about what he went on a holiday to actually, I need to go.
And I think this is where, if you've got a, space to problem solve together and role, I hate role play so much, but that's those sort of, you could have those conversations in those sort of PSH. I don't exactly know what it's called. I didn't go to school in England, so I get some of the names wrong. PSHCE, PSHE.
You can use that one, PSHE, PSHE, PHSE, PHCCE.
Social education is what we had.
You can have 2 E's on the end as well, just for more fun.
Okay. I'll add one to the beginning. Why not? You could do problem solving scenarios. So what could you say? What would be good suggestions? Let's think of some really bad suggestions. How could we make it go worse? And then how do we, what could be helpful, and what are we not sure about? What might be helpful? What do people think? So
in my head, I've got a game where somebody's got to explain something. Yin has Yin, you're going to explain this. And then Louise pulls out after 5 minutes, you've got to leave, but politely.
Yeah.
Or, Louise, you've pulled I don't understand, please can you explain it again card. And it's just those, imagine it's that sort of thing.
Yeah. And as you say, part of it is sometimes you are going to hurt people's feelings. Sometimes you are going to make them angry. And it's sort of trying to find out the safest way to do that for yourself and for others, and how you could repair that if it's possible. But, it's a really complex subject.
And even that angry person, it's good that they understand the perspective of that person who needs to go at a certain time as well. So, that whole level of social understanding is just so important at the end of the day. I thought it'd be quite nice to have everyone in the classroom, so just the whole class create their kind of what they feel that how they best communicate, almost like a communication passport, but for everybody. Just saying, I like to talk a lot about this kind of thing. I use a lot of humor when I'm talking. I might sometimes interrupt, but then that's when I'm really passionate about what I'm talking about. There might be someone who goes, I like using visuals. I'm a bit shyer, so I might not talk so much, but I like to think about what you say. It might take me a while, but then I'll get back to you. So people will get to understand, we talk about understanding each other's perspectives. Maybe that would help. And maybe that would also support that kind of conflict resolution as well. I understand that person's a bit, but finds it really tricky to say when they need to leave, and they might say it in a certain way. And they've put that, they've expressed that. I know that about that person, and that's okay.
As you said earlier, that spoken or speaking and listening comes before everything else. It's used everywhere. Yeah. And if we think of a child development, we listen, then we speak or we communicate, then we read, then we write.
Yes.
We forget the first two. We focus on reading and writing in schools, and you have children who struggle with writing. But do they struggle with writing? Or actually, do they not have those skills with it that they can actually do it orally?
Yes.
So are they actually struggling to sequence events? Are they struggling to talk about something? Are they kind of not telling you information? And actually what you might find is, yes, there is a writing issue, or actually they're not even doing it orally. Yeah. So it's not about the writing. Forget the writing. Let's focus on doing it orally. The writing will follow.
That's it.
For me, I'm neurodivergent, and I was someone who could communicate and contribute into those class discussions. Great ideas, really contributing. Nothing came out on paper.
And I'm kind of the opposite in a way. I find writing a real strength. And I think that's from being brought up in an kind of EAL background, really. With my mum and dad, they talked a different language. I learned English from school. I learned English mainly from reading, in fact. So a lot of my written stuff, I find I feel very comfortable. The talking is a little bit like I might have different word orders and things like that, because I've learned that from my mum. I might say words in a different way because that's the way my mum talked. It's really quite an interesting thing. So yeah, behind everything, there is that kind of, spoken element. The speech and language are so foundational as well to the literature skills. I mean, both can play off each other. But I think one of the biggest things is confidence. I think when it comes to oracy, I find that, in our generation, people are less confident to do their presentations, to, speak up about, to kind of like have a discussion and really put across their point of view. Some people find public speaking very tricky. I think public speaking is I think is the third most feared thing. So it's quite high up. I think it's higher than things like death. You know what I mean? It's higher than so many things. Public speaking is one of the top feared things, one of the top the biggest fears. So yeah, it's if we can get those skills about being confident more than anything else, the confidence behind talking and putting across a point of view, then that's brilliant in itself.
Have you heard of Toastmasters?
Yes.
I have. Yeah, I went to one.
Did you?
Yeah, just one. It was quite scary, I have to say.
So Toastmasters is basically, again, listening to what we talk about, Toastmasters is Oracy skills for adults who are using it within their work. And I'm a Toastmaster. I'm now the Vice President of Education or something. But it is all about improving those skills. But what I love about it is you're learning how to speak within a allotted time. You're learning the structure. You're learning how you deliver. There is this is how we recommend doing it. I look at it going, yeah, that's not going to work for me. But what I also learning is in my evaluation of others, you learn a lot.
Mm.
So as you're listening to someone speaking, they're using the power of 3 and this and all this. And I'm going, the power of what? Google power of 3. Yeah, if you say important, clear information, power of 3, it kind of helps people. It always sticks with 3 things. If you do 2, not so good. Do 2, 4, people have fallen asleep. But it's the 3 apparently works really well. And all these different things. And you're watching these people and you're learning so much. But that person who's talking is just as scared as you are.
Yeah.
But it's building that confidence.
Yes, and it's practicing, as you said. Even back, I was looking at Marion Blank's work and blank question. The different question levels, and one of her big things is that two-way interaction of the more vocabulary you have, the more abstract your thinking can become. So the harder problems you can solve and discuss with people. And as children age and become young people and teenagers, they start to use all that, different metacognitive type words like, what's the difference between discuss and debate and explain? And it's that sort of almost like a whirlwind up of the more you learn, the more you can do, and the more you use it, the more you learn. So it's just giving them that time, like
practice.
You said,
and practice and exposure, isn't it? That's not as bad as it first seems.
No. And if you've never heard of the blank questions, we did a podcast many years ago with the wonderful Angharad Welsh on verbal reasoning, where I'd never heard of verbal reasoning. I'd never heard of blank questions. And it was one of those podcasts where I learned a lot, blew me away. And it was really obvious when I looked about having conversations with my children, miles too abstract for them, miles too abstract, simplify it down, got the answers.
I have written a blog for Speech and Language Link about it. I am no way positing myself as an expert, by the way. It's something I'm really interested in. So
it's fascinating.
It is.
It's useful in terms of Oracy as well, if you think about what levels of debate and discussion that they can have in the classroom. If you're asking questions out to the class and ask them to talk about it, then they might well get stuck because the level of verbal reasoning is way too high.
How can you break it down?
Yeah.
How do you scaffold it? Well, maybe if I only take it down a level, actually they could answer that question, and then either I model the answer, or they might be able to work it up for themselves, or one of their classmates might say, oh, I think I've got it, and then peer model it.
Okay, we're coming to an end, I feel. Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add before we go?
No, thank you for letting us come on and talk at you.
I did say before we started recording, I don't need to join in the conversation. You two can talk amongst yourselves, and you've done quite a good job of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
But it just comes back to is schools need to give those opportunities to have those conversations, to help people bounce ideas off each other, have disagreements, resolve those problems. That needs to happen more, and you don't even have to prove it happened. There shouldn't be a need to document or record or anything. It should be just that trust that it's happening, and hopefully we'll see how that impacts them in other areas. Okay. So you've sent me some information. So you give me lots of links from the EEF, National Association of College Employers, Voice 21, and the Oracy Cambridge, Oracy Skills Framework, and Oracy Education Commission. So you've given me lots of links, and you'll find all of those links in the show notes, along with how to find out more about speech and language link. And as always, you're going to find those show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Zencast website. And if you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics, or anything else, please send a message via social media. We're on Twitter. We're going to be on Blue Sky soon. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, most of them. Or send an email to hello@thezencast.com. The Zencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. And do you know about our AI features in our assessment software? Teachers can use our AI to help write their reports or summarize progress. And teachers can choose key achievements and key next steps for each pupil, so it is very personalized. And the AI takes the hard work away, turning those bullet points you want to focus on, creating lovely paragraphs of text so you don't have to. And the system can also translate those paragraphs into 40 different languages, helping to engage parents where English is not their first language. So visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and the AI. So, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Zencast. It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me, Yin.
And goodbye from me, Lou.
Bye.